Today's daf going to be learning is Bava Batra daf kuf lamed bet. We're going to um, go back I just want to review a little bit what we saw in the previous class. We had the case of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and his opinion, and what we said was the beginning, the way yesterday's daf started out, and you might get confused when you look at the beginning of today's daf because it starts out with the same question of Rava. And in fact, Rava is going to ask this question three times. Bibari he'ach. What is the case for? Does this apply to a bari as well? So, but in three totally different cases. The first case was Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, the law of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that one can say, I want to give to one son over the other sons, or one daughter over the other daughters. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says you could do that, to which the Rava asked, is that true only when one is on one's deathbed, or even during one's lifetime? And we had an answer to that question because we found the source where one did it, even when he was buried, but then, right, which was the ketuba in Dichrin. However, it wasn't so clear because then we had maybe it's because it's a Tanai Beit Din. We weren't sure. Still, Abai said, well, maybe because it says you're Shun. It sounds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Either which way, we sort of had an answer, but it wasn't clear in the end if the Gemara really answered the question or wasn't really a good answer. Now we're going to go to the second question of Bari Half, and today we're going to get to the third one as well. Now, the law that we're in right now is someone who writes all of his property to his wife. We said, lo sa el apitropa. We assumed the husband didn't really mean to give his wife all the property and, to the detriment of all the children. But what he really meant was, I want, when I die, you to respect your mother and listen to what she says. She's the one who's going to be in charge. And he wrote it down to make sure that everybody takes her seriously. And we said yesterday, perhaps, and it was just one of the commentaries, they try to figure out why this is. Maybe it's because it was written. That's why we take it. It's clear indicator that he wanted her to get it, because otherwise this seems to go right against Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, because we have Beno Katan, Beno Gadol, right, that he could give to one of the kids over the others, and it actually doesn't mean he was giving to one of them. Anyway, I'm going to leave that question aside. We're going to start our daf today with Bibari Heach. And I just want to remind you, because this is going to come up again, we basically said anyone who writes all of his property to his wife, and now we're focusing on the wife, is really just meant to make her an apotropos, which is really like a steward, right, in charge of dividing up the property or investing the property before it gets divided up. But then we said that there was an exception, because the issue is he's going to want to do this specifically to his wife, and to his wife that he's actually married to, and not a wife that he's only betrothed to, not a wife he's divorced from, and also the wife among the sons. Some people thought that not the wife among the daughters, or not the wife among wife among the brothers, or not the wife among the sons of the husband that are not her sons, right? There was a deliberation about that. And then we also, although everyone in the end said yes, even then it would be. And the bat be'etzel habanim, everyone agreed, a daughter among brothers, there's really no reason to want to afford her respect, which means if it's not to afford her respect, then actually she does get all the property if he wrote it all to her. I see you're asking is like an executor. The truth is, when I wrote my summaries, yesterday I wrote it was executor. Today I was thinking, when I was writing my summary, I'm not really sure it's an executor, because an executor is the one who's really in charge of, I'm not sure. It's a good question, whether it's an executor or not. I wasn't sure. I deliberated. Today I wrote in the summary, I called it a steward. It's more like someone kind of in charge of the property, but an executor is more in charge of dividing it up. I think the executor wouldn't necessarily be the one investing it and dealing with it. I'm not sure. Right? Is that true, Terry? You're saying what I'm saying now is right? I don't know. You could write it in the chat and that is a trustee, right? So I guess it could be a trustee. Okay. So now comes Rava and asks, by Rava, Bibari Heach, what about if someone said this when they were healthy? Okay, now there's a question here, and thankfully Rava kind of gives us both sides of the question, because it's not so clear. And what I mentioned yesterday, and I'll mention it again, in general, what we're going to learn today is not so clear. It's not so clear because we don't understand this so well, because we didn't live in their society. We don't understand the positions in society and what the needs are and what happens when a husband dies, leaves a wife, leaves kids. There seems to be this concern that once the husband dies, the children might not respect the mother. Okay, now if we're talking about other sons of his, we could see if we're talking about her own sons, it seems to be strange, but the Gemara seemed to assume that we are talking about her own sons. And maybe you can take a bunch of things from today's stuff and learn about women's standing in society in those days. But what we're also going to see is how important it was for women to actually be respected in their society. So on the one hand, it sort of shows that maybe there was a bit of a lack of respect in society, but you might say maybe those women didn't really care. But today you're going to see the women did care, and they would do things and even sometimes give up on rights to things, which we're going to see soon, just to have that respect, that it was worth a lot to them, which is interesting. I was thinking about the sugya of Isha Chashuva in leaning on Pesach, that if you're in Isha Chashuva, and it does seem like it was important. So let's read on and we'll see. And I want you to kind of think about that as we learn. So they ask, here are the two sides of Rava's question. When he's on his deathbed, what's he worried about? He's worried that people will listen to what he wants, right? That what he wanted in life, he's hoping will be true after his death. So if he wants them to afford respect to the wife, he's going to have to make it very clear at his death. And therefore, he wrote down, you are to respect your mother on this issue. She's going to be in charge of the will, in charge of my property. Aval bebari hakaihu. But when he's alive, he's there. Now, what does it mean he's there? Well, here's what goes back to what I said before. While he's alive, these children are scared of him. There seemed to be this fear relationship. At least this is what the commentaries say. They were in fear of him, and because they fear their father, they fear their mother as well. Okay, and that there was this, this issue of they respected the mother because the father was there. But there was this concern that after his death, that maybe they wouldn't respect her as much, and therefore, when he's well, he's not worrying about this issue. It's only on his deathbed. And therefore, if he writes all his nechasim to his wife in his lifetime, when he's still healthy, that's not what's on his mind right now. So he actually meant, and what's not on his mind is, oh, well, she's going to be the steward and I want you to respect her, so I'm writing it down. No, he actually must be really meaning the simple meaning of, I'm writing you all of my possessions. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps, this is the other side of the question, barinami lichadei delishina mila mihashta. Even when he's healthy, he still wants to ensure, now again, it's a little hard to understand what this is saying, but perhaps it means that he wants them to know that sometime down the road, he won't be here and they're going to have to listen to their mother as well. And they're going to have to afford her the respect she deserves. So maybe this is how we plan in our lifetime for what might happen after death and to make sure that everything's in place, right? There's logic to that as well. In which case, if he writes all his property to his wife, he doesn't really mean that. He really means, I'm giving her the rights to be the steward when I die. So Tashma, let's try to learn it from here. We're going to have a long getting into something else, and then we'll see the connection. Hakotev perot nechasav lishto. Okay, now we go back to the ketuba. A woman, okay, we have to have some background information. A woman has rights to her ketuba, right, when they get married, even if you didn't write the ketuba. We talked about it yesterday. Tonight, ketuba is there anyway, even if you didn't write a ketuba. She gets rights to X amount of money. Now, that means that any property the husband has at the time of the marriage is now lien to her. So she can always collect it from land that might have been sold to somebody else. So let's say he writes, Perot nechasav liishto. Now, she can only demand it from lien property if there's, right, she can get it from property of the husband if there's property. But she gets her ketuba really from land. So if he gives all the perot to her, okay, he gives her all the movables, but still leaves land in his estate, okay, he doesn't write her everything, well, then obviously she can still collect her ketuba, okay, because she collects her ketuba from land only. So, govak ketubatam in a karka. So, well, he gave her all the perot as a gift, right, all the movables, but he left land in the estate. So very easily, this is very obvious halacha. We'll see this is just a build-up to what we're going to get to. She has land to collect her ketuba from, so she gets it from the land. What if he gives her as a gift a quarter, a third, or a half of his land? Not the payroll, but half of the land. Now, as a gift. Well, since she could still collect her ketuba from the other half, or 2/3, or 3/4 of the land, govak ketubatam in a. Again, as long as he leaves land for her, land in the estate, she could say, yeah, you gave me that as a gift, but I still have my ketuba money. I'm going to get my ketuba money from the land that's left. However, and this is the big case, if he gave her all of his possessions, now this is the important part, because remember, what does it mean, gave her all his possessions? We said it means he just made her an apotropos. This seems to say he gave her all the possessions and she actually became the owner of all the possessions. So we're going to have to prove this is in a case of a bari. And once we do that, we could say, oh, look, right here you see, she's not an apotropos. Okay, that's the main point here, but we'll get back to that. But now we have to understand the context is not so simple. If he wrote her all of his possessions, gave her everything, all the land and all the movables, doesn't matter, but the land is what's important. So she gets them as a gift. That's obvious from here. They're all hers. Now she owns all the property. But what if, when she does the gift is from now, not from when the marriage happened, right? The ketuba she could collect from land that was taken by other people or anything, or he sold to other people because it was hers. She had a shibud on it. She had a lien. So if he sold land, if he hasn't land left, and he sold, she can take from there. But if he gave her all her property, and then someone else came along, now when he gives it to her, it's a gift from now, not from the beginning of the marriage, which means that if someone had a loan out before, if the husband had a loan outstanding, someone could come collect it from that land that she got as a gift. Not if it was her ketuba money, because her ketuba money preceded the loan. But if it was land if it was a loan that was taken before the gift, then what happens? Now, I just want to make it very clear. When she got all the property, what happened? There was no land left for her to claim her ketuba. So by getting, who needed it, she got it as a gift. So theoretically, or maybe not even theoretically, practically speaking, when she accepted all the land as a gift, she gave up her rights to collect the ketuba because she didn't need it anymore. Unless the following thing happens. What if someone then comes after she gets all the land as a gift and collects all the land on behalf of a loan that the husband owed? Now she's got nothing, right? She can't collect her ketuba, or maybe she can, right? Theoretically, if someone collected the land, she has a lien on that land from her ketuba. But if she let go of her ketuba obligation and said, I'm mochelet, I'm saying, oh, I give up all my rights, I forfeited my rights to it because I was happy to get all the property instead of just what I would have gotten from a ketuba, well, then now she's stuck and she gets nothing. So let's see what the halacha says. Well, there's a machloket, not a surprise. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, tikara matnata, v'tamora ktubata. She'll tear the document that the husband gave her of all his property. She's like, thanks, but no thanks. This didn't really help me. Retroactively, it'll be as if she never received the gift. And she could go back and collect her ketuba from the land they just took from her. Okay? So let's say they took, 100 acres of land and she was owed in her ketuba 50. So she'll take 50 back. If she was owed 100 in her ketuba, she could take it all back. Okay? And then at least she's left with something. But Chachamim Omrim, the rabbis, which is the mainstream opinion, and we'll see Rav Nachman holds like them, Tikara ktubata. Her ketuba gets torn up because she totally forfeited her rights. It's too late. V'tamora matanata. All she has is the gift, which is nothing right now. V'nimtzeit karachat mikan u'mikan. And this is where they say, right? It's a very famous line. You're bald from both sides. Okay, she basically, her matana ended up being 0, which looked like a great matana. It turns out it was nothing. And her ketuba was nothing because she gave up her rights to it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda and Hanachtom. Now we get an actual case that happened. Rabbi Yehuda the baker said, my niece was married to my son. Okay, cousins can marry each other. And a case happened where he promised her all of his property. Ubama said lifnei chachamim, and it came up before the rabbis, right? And then it was taken away because he owed money to someone, and she ended up with nothing. And the rabbi said, Tikarak ktubata v'tamora matanata. You have to tear her ketuba because she forfeited it already, and all she has is her gift. And then say karachat mikan u'mikan, right? She really ends up in a bad situation. Now, what's the point of this whole thing? Why did we bring this? Because we wanted to know, is it true in a case of a bari that if you give her all your possessions, you'll end up, right? She will only be a steward. She doesn't really get all your property. You didn't really mean it. Well, look at this case. Why did she end up with nothing? Tamad yatsa alav shtarchov, only because somebody took it away. But halo yatsa alav shtarchov kanya. But it was clear if there hadn't been a shtar chov and no creditor came along to collect the loan, then basically she would have gotten all the possessions. Now we have to figure out, because our question was it bari or shchimera? Now, it's obvious it's going to have to be bari because, b'mai, what's the case? If it's someone on their deathbed, we already learned, ha'amart, lo asa el apitropus. We just said in the previous daf. That's the case where it's obvious she's only a steward. So this would have to be, by default, it can't be a shchimera, it must be a bari. Elalat b'bari. And there's our answer to our question. But not so simple. The Gemara is actually going to reject this answer because of what we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, which is la'olam b'shchimera. No, you can explain this was the case of a shchimera, but it was one of those unique exceptions where he's not making his wife a steward because they're only divorced, they're already divorced, or they're only betrothed, and he doesn't have that close connection where he wants to make her respected. So Rav Avira mukele b'kulu, Ravina mokele b'ishto rusa b'ishto grusha. Okay, Rav Avira explains it could be in all those cases, and Ravina says it could be in ishto rusa, ishto grusha. Now, if you look back at Rav Avira, he doesn't really say all those cases. Remember, he said in all the cases it works other than isha etzel achim, isha etzel b'nei abal. Those two, it doesn't work. So those two, definitely not. Okay, there it's only a steward. It is that he was making her steward. The only other case that Rav Avira adds to Ravina, besides the ishto rusa and ishto grusha, is bat etzel ha-banim. If he did it to the daughter, Rav Avira thinks that he is doing it to give her respect. I'm sorry, he's not doing it to give her respect. And Ravina, I think it's Ravina, yeah, thinks he is. Anyway, the point is you can't establish it in that case either because it's bat etzel achim, and this was not a daughter, this was a wife. So in the end, Rav Avira and Ravina, they say it in a bit of a weird way, but they're really both saying the same thing. It has to be ishto arusa or ishto grusha. Okay. Amar Rav Yosef, Bar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman. So now, basically, what we tried to do here, just to get with what the purpose of this in the Gemara was, to get to an answer of Rabba's question. Here we see a source where he wrote Kol Nechasim, and it went to her, and it must not be a shchimera, it must be a bari, and there's our answer. But the Gemara says, no, you could explain it in one of those exceptions to the rule in a shchimera, and therefore it could be in a regular wife, even if he was healthy. Could be he really meant just to make her a steward. We don't really know, so we're basically without an answer. But if we already mentioned this case, now we're going to see how Rav Nachman rules, and we're going to do the same thing with the sugya today is basically two sugyot on which Rabba asked this question. We'll get to another sugya, which is a Mishnah in Peah. And then in both cases, we're going to get to what does Rav Nachman hold like. Because if you remember, Rav Nachman was a central figure in terms of Dinei Mamonot, right? He was in the school of Shmuel. We've seen this a lot in our Masechet. Shmuel, because our Masechet is really Dinei Mamonot, and all sorts of monetary law, and Rav Nachman was one of the main figures here. Amar Rav Yosef Bar Yomi Amar Rav Nachman halacha ti karak shubatav talmud matanatav and say karachat mikan and mikan. Okay, so forgetting about the whole thing about the steward, now we're just talking about this particular case. In this particular case, if she got it as a gift, again, however you explain it, that she got everything as a gift and wasn't made a steward, but however you explained it, either it was a bari or it was just one of these unique exceptions, then she ends up really stuck in this case with nothing. But now the Gemara is going to question this based on a psikah of Rav Nachman somewhere else. Wait, does Rav Nachman not hold by an umdana? Okay, now what's an umdana? An umdana is where we make an assessment. Now, if you went to this woman and tried to go into her mind and say, what was she thinking? Right? She was thinking that I'm giving up my rights to my ketuba, I'm forfeiting my rights because I'm getting something more. But had she known that she would lose all of it, of course she never would have forfeited her rights. That would be by going by umdana and basically going by Rabbi Eliezer, which is retroactively, we're going to reinstate the ketuba. But Rav Nachman doesn't hold that. And in fact, in a different case, Rav Nachman does hold by umdana. So it's another case where somebody thought something, acted upon what they thought, didn't know all the details. And then we basically go back to what we assumed he would have done had he had full disclosure from the beginning. V'hatanya, it doesn't say in a braita, harei shalach beno lemedinat hayam. If somebody's son travels, v'shamasha make beno, and he gets a message that his son is dead. Ve'aman v'katav kol nechasav lachechim. So based on the information he had, he thought he had no sons anymore. He only had one son, I guess. And he basically says, fine, I'll write to give all my property to other people. And then his son shows up. He was still alive. Matanato matana. So according to Tanakama, that gift is a gift. Meaning, it's too late. What's done is done. That matches the rabbis. But Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, "En matanato matana. She'ilu haya yodeh shebeno kayam lo ktavam." Of course, that's not a real gift. Had he known that his son was still alive, he never would have written it. And therefore, we revert back to what it was before he wrote it. But Amar Rav Nachman halachak Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, and Rav Nachman paskins like Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe here. So why by us doesn't he paskin that way? And this goes back to what I said in the beginning of class about the woman and her desire to be in a position where she's respected. Shane Hatam. Now, this is just a response to a contradiction. So I want to just point out, when you're learning Gemara and someone says, this is my opinion, right? We already learned when someone says, this is my opinion, it doesn't even mean, right? It could be, this is what I think. It doesn't necessarily mean we act upon it. That was the whole sugya we saw before. But all the more so when the Gemara responds to some contradiction and they're stuck in a corner and they have to answer something, they come up with some answer. So whether you agree with it or not, right, it's an answer. It doesn't mean necessarily it's the truth. It doesn't mean it's the only possibility. It's a Gemara trying to attempt to answer a question. So you can take it with like that. But, because you can wonder, if I were that woman, would I want this? Is this where, try to imagine yourself. And again, we don't live then, so we don't really know. But Shane Hatam, that's a different case. Denichale, de tipokale, in other words, our case is different. Denichala, de tipokala kala, de katvina niale lahanu nechasim. The woman gets a lot of benefit from the fact that the husband wrote her all of his possessions. That means that in society, people say, wow, this husband must have a lot of respect for his wife if instead of giving his property to children, he gave everything to his wife. And that puts her in a position of prominence that she's happy to forfeit her rights to the ketuba for that position of prominence, even if in the end she'll lose all her money. And that's why I say you got to wonder, would you be, especially a woman in those times, would you be happy with no property in the end and you don't get your ketuba money, which was supposed to support you for once your husband dies? You'd rather have the prominence? I don't know. Okay? Hard to know. We don't live then and we don't understand. But that's what the Gemara at least provides as a possible answer to why Rav Nachman would distinguish between those two cases. It could be Rav Nachman distinguished for a different reason. We don't know. It could be he changed his mind about the whole umdana thing from one psak to the other. We don't really know. But this is what the Gemara answers, and we're going to see this again later, that the woman is happy to be in a position where people see, wow, the husband gave her all this money. So even if in the end she ends up with nothing, because some creditor takes it, she's still happy to have forfeited her ketuba, right? You have to understand the way it works. For that benefit she got of being prominent, she forfeited her ketuba. So even if later she needs her ketuba, it's too late because she forfeited because she gained something. It's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean at the end she ended up with nothing. She ended up with something, this prominence, and that was important to her. Tanan Hatam. Now it's interesting. The person who got this other man's possessions because he thought his son, that's not enough prominence that, oh, this guy gave me his money or wanted to promise money. That wasn't exactly enough to say, oh, on that he was willing to, right? It's different anyway because he wasn't forfeiting anything. Anyway, it's not really comparable. Now we're going to get to this Mishnah and Peah. So we're done with the sugya, which was, Bibari he'ach, do we make her an apitropos, or do we say, no, he really meant to give her all the property? And then we don't really know. And in the end, we learned some other sugya. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to learn a different sugya, and Rav is also going to ask the same question, but it's going to take us a long time until we get to Rav. Tananatam. So a Mishnah in Peah. Hakotev nechasav lebanav, v'katav leishto karka kolshehu. Ibdak ketubata. We're still in the ketuba. A man writes all of his property to his sons. I'm giving you this, I'm giving you that, I'm giving you that, I'm giving you that. Leaves no property to the woman. Sorry, except for a little small piece of land and says, this is what you're getting. She loses her ketuba. That's it. Instead of getting, okay, it's like as if you owe me $100 and you give me a little, nothing, a little piece of paper, or I don't know, something worth a little more than a piece of paper, but, something worth $5. And you say, here, take this for your $100 loan. And basically, if I take it, that's it. You don't owe me $100. Now, you could say, imagine that would be the case. I would scream bloody murder. Like, what do you mean? You owe me $100. You're not paying me $5. And this woman didn't. So that seems to be probably part of the issue here. So the Gemara is going to ask immediately, before they even read the second part of the Mishnah, which is a different opinion, Rabbi Yossi. But before we get there, the Gemara stops us in the middle of reading this Mishnah and says, Mishum dekadav lakarka kolshu ibdak tubata. What kind of craziness? She loses her entire ketuba, all that money, because she got a little teeny piece of land? So we're going to have three interpretations of Amoraim about this. Later, we're going to say there's a difficulty. The first thing we're going to say after doing this is quote the rest of the Mishnah and say the rest of the Mishnah seems to raise a problem with these three Amoraim. So here come their three explanations. Each one's going to do what we call an ukimta, explain that is in a particular situation. Amarav b'mizakel lahen al yada. It was a case where he gave the boys, the sons, the rights to the land with her together. They stood as like a united front, gave out the parcels of land to the sons. She got the small piece of land. And with that, all these cases we're going to see, she somehow indicated, not directly by saying, I'm willing to take this instead of my ketuba, but by being part of the whole interaction shows her consent. This is someone said, what if she doesn't want it, right? If she objected, that would be a different story. That brings us back to, right, the whole macha'an, protesting and how that shows. By not protesting, it shows acceptance. According to Rav, though, it had to be more than just not protesting. It would have to be where she was involved in the process. Each one's going to kind of remove her a little bit more from the picture. Shmuel Amar b'mechalek lefanav shoteket. She was there when he gave it out. She wasn't part of it. She was standing there and she was silent. So again, shtikako da'ah, silence is like admission. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Omer, be'omer latzli karka zo b'ketubatech. Here, they say she didn't even have to be there. But if he said the words, take this, even though she wasn't there, but take this for your ketuba, and he specifically indicated that this is for your ketuba money, and again, she doesn't protest, I guess, later when she hears about it or something like that, it's not exactly clear from him, then that is an indicator that this is in place of her ketuba. And the Gemara just points out here, umi kula ketuba shanukan. This is a huge kula in terms of ketuba. Now, who's the kula? There's two sides. It's a kula for the man. There's a lot of kulas about ketuba. And apropos, my high school teacher, Rabbi Harari, who passed away this week, I remember learning this with him the first time. This line about tov lemetav tandu lemetav or melo. Women would always prefer to get married, right? As high school kids, we had a hard time with that line. Even as older women, I think we have a harder time with that line. Which is a woman would always rather live together than live alone. And therefore, even though the ketuba was there to protect her, there's all sorts of leniencies because the rabbis wanted to make it easier for the men to get married because the men were less likely to want to get married than the women, and there needed to be incentives to even though they were providing protection for the women in the ketuba, they made it easier for the husband. Like, for example, you pay with the ziburit, the poor land, right? You could take his worst land to pay for the ketuba. And like this case, which is even if, right, he has this way of giving her a small piece of land, and as long as she doesn't protest, it seems like then already. And some of the commentaries say this is just on the last opinion. Some people say it's on all the three opinions of the Amoraim. Either which way, the point is there's some kula here. And that's because again, women would always rather get married. Again, right? They also quoted Gemara in Ketubot that says the same idea. Yoter of the Rashbam quotes this. Yoter misha ish rotzeh lisa, isha rotzeh linaseh. More than a man wants to get married, the woman really wants to get married. Okay, right? Yes, we still have difficulty with the statement, whether it's true or not. Some people might still think it's somewhat true today, but certainly in those days, you have to understand it in the sense of they were financially dependent on the men for the most part. And a woman who wasn't married, we see that from many sources, was in a difficult place. Okay. And therefore you could see why they needed the marriage because it was financial stability. Otherwise she was reliant on her father who, as we learned the other day, right? Once she's at age 6, he doesn't even have to support her if he doesn't want to. I mean, sort of he does. And the rabbis kind of tried to override that, but to a certain extent, she was a little bit, could be left on her own somewhat. And I think it was more of a financial thing. Whereas nowadays, thank God, it's not as much of an issue. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. How did these three Amoraim explain that she doesn't really need to accept this? And even without accepting it, right, explicit acceptance, right, because each of them maybe said she sort of accepted it or she was silent, she showed she was okay with this. It doesn't really seem to be that's what Tanakam is saying. Why is that? Because Tanan, it says after that in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, the dissenting opinion is, now the Mishnah, the Tanakam had said, if he wrote it, but there was no acceptance, is what we just said, right? Now, Rabbi Yossi says, "Im kibla aleha, af al pi shelo katav la ibdak ketubata." Rabbi Yossi goes even further to say, even if she just accepted it, she was willing to take the small piece of land, even if you didn't write her a document for it. Now, the assumption is, even though it's not clear here, but the assumption is Rabbi Yossi says either writing without acceptance or acceptance without writing. You only need one, which then means that what does Tanakama hold? Michlal de Tanakama savar ktiva v'kabbalah bai. He must be responding to the rabbis, which was the first opinion, that right, the rabbi said writing. They didn't say she accepted, but the assumption is the rabbis must have meant written document and she accepted explicitly, versus Rabbi Yossi, who says, no, you just need one of them. And then it's very hard to say what those three Amoraim said, that she didn't give any explicit consent. It was implied, but implied by silence or implied by the fact that she was helping him, but that doesn't really mean she accepted it. So we have a problem with those three Amoraim. The chitema kula Rabbi Yossi. Well, maybe you say the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. It was saying katav velo kibel, kibel velo katav, right? You need either one, and maybe that's why it started with ketuba and then it went to Kabbalah. And what it really meant is you can have it written without consent, you can have a consent without it written. But you can't say that because there was a braita about this Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda was referring to the Tanakhama's opinion, the first Tana's opinion here. The Tanya, it says in a braita, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Eimatai, when is this true that you can write it and give her a piece of land, that's anything? Well, Shahaitasha b'kibla aleh, he says, what Tanakama meant was she was there and she accepted it. Right? And this clearly goes against what those rabbis said, who one of them said she didn't even need to be there. She had to be there, she had to accept it. If she was there and didn't explicitly say, I'm okay taking this land instead of the ketuba, or kibla aleh lo tasham, or she accepted it but wasn't actually there at the time when he did it, lo ibdak ketubata. Okay, you need to both be there and to have accepted it. And if the woman didn't do that, then she doesn't lose her ketuba. And that's all explained Tanakama's opinion. So tiyufta dekulu tiyufta. This is this braita really creates a difficulty with all those three Amoraim's opinion, who seem to basically, make it very easy to say, oh yeah, the woman gave up on her rights with just some sort of, silence or something like that. So that raises a difficulty with those three opinions. We're understanding why this is in the sugya. Remember, I told you Rav is going to ask the Bari Hayach. We'll get there soon. But first, we're going to say what's the halacha, and it's a case where Rava asked Rav Nachman, and then Rav is going to ask his question. But we have to get to the psak because we've seen different opinions here. Does she need to accept? Does she not need to accept? Right, Rabbi Yossi. Again, depending on whether you accept those Amoraim or don't accept those Amoraim, would explain Tanakama's opinion. Even though we knocked them out, still we're going to ask. Rava asked Rav Nachman, Harav, Hashmuel, Harav Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, my spherale. Okay, we have Rav, Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. We're all trying to explain Tanakama. We have Rabbi Yehuda's understanding of Tanakama. We have Rabbi Yossi's opinion. He doesn't say this all, but basically he's saying, like, what do you hold by? Okay, what do we do halacha l'maaseh? Does it need to be written and accepted? Is it enough if she just writes it, or if it's just written, or she just accepts, or where do we hold? And his answer is not exactly clear. Some people explain that the Rashbam explains he's holding by Rabbi Yossi. Some people think, no, it's not so important exactly which opinion he's holding by, because it depends whether you accept all those other those Amoraim's understanding of the Mishnah or not. But he basically says the following, and this goes back again to the position of women. Amrle, sha'ani omel, he says, what I say is, kevan sha'asa'a shutaf ben habanim, ibdak ketubata. He made her like a partner in the presence of the sons, meaning, right, this was all as if she was a part of this, okay, which sounds like maybe when she accepted it, right, that she was saying, I'm in a united front with my husband, and on account of that, ibdak ketubata. Again, this is a woman who's happy to give up on her ketuba rights, which again is a crazy thing. That's like her sustenance for the future. She's willing to give up on that because of her position and how she's being held in the presence of her sons, right? We're not even talking about in the presence of other people, but in the presence of her sons, that already gives her she feels comfortable giving up her ketubah. Now, you could say if she's in a position of respect among the sons, I'm all of a sudden thinking about something I didn't think about before. It could be that means they'll support her forever. In other words, she doesn't need a ketuba money, right? Once they have respect for her, they'll take care of her, and and maybe that's why it was, there was this thing about the needing respect specifically among the sons. Maybe that was the most, as opposed to we said maybe if it's brothers, maybe if it's right, if it's the sons, she has the most chances of them taking care of her forever, and maybe that has something to do with it. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't really know, but this is a big deal. She's willing to give up her ketuba because of the place that she gets with the sons. And each barnami, Amar Rav Yosef bar Yomi, Amar Rav Nachman. In case that wasn't convincing enough that the Gemara told you that Rav Nachman said it. Well, Rav Yosef bar Yomi also said in the name of Rav Nachman, Kevan she'asah shutaf ben avanim ibda ketubata. So she loses, she gives up, she forfeits her rights. It doesn't mean she loses, right? I'm translating it literally loses. What it really means is she forfeits. She forfeits her rights for ketuba for this position that she's getting among her sons. So now finally we get to why we said this. Well, Rava wants to know, by Rava, after Rav Nachman paskins this way, bibari he'ah. Is this true also for if he does this if he does this divvying up of the property when he is healthy? Now, why is it important? It's not important so much what he's thinking when he's a shchibnera. It's important what she's thinking when he's a shchibnera. And here's a totally different issue than the previous cases. When he's dying, she knows that if she gets this land and everything else is divided by the sons, she's not going to get her ketuba money, and there's no future land that the husband's going to get in inheritance because he's dying. Now, we did mention some possibility the other day that maybe at the moment he's dying and he's not even conscious anymore, he gets more land. But that's not what she's thinking of, that very remote possibility. So Hudiyada, she knows delately that he's got no other property other than everything he's dividing right now, and then no future money is coming to him. Vikamachla, and she agreed. But aval bibari, if he's healthy, she's willing to say, let's give out all your property that you have now. Because remember, you can't give out property he doesn't have. So maybe she's hoping, yes, I'm willing to right now stand with you, and we'll give out everything to the sons, and I'll take a little part. But it doesn't mean I'm giving up on my ketuba. You might acquire more property down the road. And any property you acquire down the road, I can collect my ketuba from, because I can't collect it from what was gifted to our children now, even though it won't happen maybe till he dies, but it's gifted to them technically from now. From there, I know I can't collect my ketuba, but it's very likely you'll make more money, you'll have more land, you might inherit something, and I'll collect my ketuba from there. So maybe she wasn't even giving up on her ketuba when she agreed to this whole thing, when he's buried. So Bibari Savra Hadar Kani. She thought maybe he'll acquire more land over time. O Dilma Hashtamia lately. Or do we say, right now he doesn't happen to have anything else, and therefore she knows at that moment, what if he were to drop dead that moment? She'll know she has nothing, and she's willing to give up her ketuba rights. And therefore, even though he's healthy right now, who knows what will be in a week and a month, and unlikely he'll amass more property in that time period. So maybe she really was giving up her rights. And here, as opposed to the other cases where the Gemara attempted and maybe succeeded, maybe did, we weren't sure about the first one. The second time they didn't succeed at getting an answer in this one, the Gemara just says right away, Rimay Yadayim, as they say, puts up their hands and says, okay, take it. We don't really have an answer for this question. We don't know. And with that, we're going to move on. There's 3 cases. We're only going to read the first one today, and then we'll stop for today. Haluda Amar Lahu. So there's 3 cases that happened. There was a person who said, Palga lebrat upalga lebrat betilta itat bepere. I'm giving half to my daughter, half to my other daughter, okay, half to daughter 1, half to daughter 2, and a third of the payroad. Okay, obviously, a third will go to one daughter, a third will go to the other daughter. The payroad are the movables, right? The detached things, although payroad is also produce. We're going to see there was a little bit of a miscommunication here, but we'll get to that soon. So of the payroad, so let's just call them, right, produce, my wife will get a third. So she doesn't get lamb, but she gets a third of the payroad. So the question is, right, is that like karka kolshehu? Now it is payroad, which could be attached to the ground. So maybe then that is land. Maybe it's karka kolshehu. So Ikla Rav Nachman, the Surah, Rav Nachman comes to Surah, Ula Gabe Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda comes straight into Rav Nachman and says, I have a question for you. Amar Leiki, Agavna Mai. He says, what would you do in this case? What should I rule? Amar Le, Hachi Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman says, this is what Shmuel said. Again, like we keep seeing, he goes along with Shmuel. even if he only gave her 1 dekel for the peyrot, ibdak bata. In other words, all he needs to give her is 1 tree for her to get the peyrot from, meaning not even really the tree, but the tree for its fruits. Then she loses her ketuba. So how could you say that if she got peyrot that, he says, so if it's the dekel for the fruits, right, and you lose your ketuba, then here the peyrot, it would be the same thing. Now, Rav Nachman was a little confused because he thought, and this is when you have to ask questions, you have to be very specific. He assumed when he said peyrot, he meant, now why is it dekel for its fruits? Because even though you're only getting the fruits, you're still getting the tree as long as the tree is there. And the tree is attached to the ground. So we assumed the produce meant produce that's attached to the ground. So now Rav Chisda says to him, because Rav Chisda understood he wasn't talking about produce attached to the ground. He was talking about detached produce, which is clearly metaltalin movables and should have nothing to do with this. Amarle, imor da Amar Shmuel, hatam da achnele begufa da ara, hacha perihu. Chisda said, first of all, I think what Chisda was saying, yeah, if that were the case, I would have known the answer. I didn't need to ask you that question. And he's not really saying it that way. But what he's saying is, you quoted to me Shmuel to answer this question, but Shmuel was talking about something totally different. Shmuel was talking about that you have some right to the land because your tree is attached to the ground. And that can be called karka kosher. But this is not attached to the ground at all. This is the produce that's detached from the ground. And what I want to know is, if she got some of that, would that preclude her from getting her ketuba? To which we already know the answer to that question. It's interesting that Rav Chisda didn't. But Amarle, mitaltale kamart, mitaltale vadailo kamina. Oh, you were talking about mitaltale? I didn't understand that. Of course, I wasn't talking about that. No, she doesn't lose her rights. She doesn't forfeit her rights to the ketuba just because it was movables that she got. And that's the end of story 1. We'll start story number 2 tomorrow because we're going to deal with it tomorrow, and we'll see the 2 other stories that are there. So what we basically did today in terms of the structure is we had 2 questions of Rava. Is this law true for Bari? The first one was about someone who gives all this property to his wife. Is she considered just a steward, an apotropos, or trustee, or not? Or is she really, he meant it literally, you're getting all my land. And again, it was written, right? And that was the whole thing we talked about yesterday. We tried to bring an answer where we got to this case where the woman forfeits her ketuba, but which the whole point of that wasn't about the forfeiting of the ketuba. The whole point was, if the money hadn't been taken from her, right, here she got a gift from her husband of all of her property. And it must be in a bari because not shchid meirah, because shchid meirah wouldn't be the case. She would just be a steward. She wouldn't actually get the property. But the Gemara rejected it because it said there were a few exceptions to the rule yesterday that we discussed. And maybe this is one of those exceptions where she was his wife, but she wasn't really his wife married. She was either a wife that was divorced or she was a wife who was only betrothed. And then we saw how Rav Nachman Paskin there, that really she's karachat mikan and mikan in that case where it gets taken from a creditor. She ends up really with nothing. Then we went to this Mishnah in Peah, which was similar, but it was about a case where the husband gives the wife a little bit on behalf of her ketuba, and are we assuming that she forfeits her rights? And again, both these things had to do with the woman getting a sort of benefit of being viewed by others in a prominent or important position, and she's willing to kind of give up her rights to the ketuba for that, either because she got all of his money, or yesterday because she was appointed the trustee, and also in this case because she was part of the dividing up of the property. Even that would put her in a prominent position among the sons. And based on that, she ends up forfeiting her rights to the ketuba, even though also there's a bit of a debate. Does she really have to accept it? Or is it enough she sees it? Or is it enough that she didn't even see it, but it was written and that's enough? Right? We had a bunch of different opinions there. And then we saw how Rav Nachman Paskin, that it sounds like even if she doesn't, seems to say even if she doesn't accept it, it's obvious that she wants that because it makes her look good. And then we had the question of Rava, is this true in a bari case? Because maybe in a bari case, she doesn't really forfeit her rights because she thinks that he'll get more land later and I'll be able to get my ketuba rights. And we really have no answer to that. And then we just saw a case, and then it just turned out Rav Nachman didn't really understand the details, and it was only metaltalin. And once it was metaltalin, for sure, this whole halacha is irrelevant. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day and b'sarat tova.